be looking at life in colonial America and the roles women play in our society. It is often hard to decide what to make for supper. Tonight we'll be making a roast chicken and fresh homemade bread.
We're so lucky to have chicken for supper. As the weather grows colder, it's difficult to go hunting.
First, we'll prepare the roast chicken. After killing the chicken, cleaning out the innards and the gizzard, it is ready to be roasted in the oven.
As we season the chicken, notice the great earthly flavors that give it such impressive taste and color.
Bake for at least 30 or 40 minutes, or until golden brown.
A large range of spices were often used to season foods in the colonial times. Some of the most popular spices were sage, parsley, dill, and thyme. Colonial peoples also flavored their foods with nutmeg, vinegar, ginger, and wines.
Next up is the bread. I picked the wheat out of the field this morning. Add flour, water, yeast, and milk into a bowl. Knead the dough until soft. Wow, look at that gorgeous color. Preserving food in colonial times was very difficult, as there was no form of refrigeration. Food cooked had to be eaten or else it would rot within 4 or 5 days if not preserved. When Europeans arrived in the Americas in the 17th century, several methods of preserving food had been developed.
One of the first methods of food preservation was known as sun drying. This involved laying the meat directly in the sunlight to remove all excess moisture and essentially drying out the meat. However, this only worked if the meat was cut thin enough, as meat that was too thick wouldn't dry properly.
Another popular method of preserving foods in colonial times was simply putting it in salt. Because it was economically difficult to feed animals in the winter, they were often killed in the months of fall and then preserved in the salt. Fish and meat that were cut were buried in the salt, which removed all the moisture.
They let the fish and meat sit in salt for about a week, then put them in barrels with even more salt where they were stored. One benefit of the salt was it repelled insects from landing on the meat while drying. After this process, when people wanted to eat the food again, they simply washed off the salt. The only problem with this process was that it required a tremendous amount of salt, and sometimes it was not always available.
Our home, Syracuse, New York, actually played a very significant part in food preservation in the 16th and 17th centuries. In the early 1600s, there were salty brine springs surrounding part of Salt Lake, which is known today as Onondaga Lake.
In the late 1700s, the Onondaga Salt Springs Reservation provided the basis and foundation for commercial salt production for approximately 200 years. That is where Syracuse got its early nickname as the Salt City.
Other methods of food preservation include drying, potting, and pickling.
Oh, what a wonderful feast we have gathered upon us tonight. I just love being able to stay home every hour of the day making food for my husband.
Me too, Gwendolyn. It's just the best feeling in the world. My husband can come home, have a nice hot meal, and see all 10 of our children tucked into bed and sound asleep.
Ah, yes, colonial life is so simple. Us women have it easy.
Why, yes, Gwendolyn, I completely agree. Jamestown is the best place for any colonial woman living in America.
Actually, life in colonial America sucked. Let me elaborate. Life in colonial America for women was so terrible because they had hardly any rights. Women weren't allowed to vote or participate in any legal matters, such as holding office. With very few legal rights, their life didn't really exist outside of the home.
The majority of women received very little education. However, while some did learn to read and write, many were illiterate. Young girls usually learned housekeeping skills required to manage a home from their mother. People thought a woman didn't need an education, as they were supposed to work in the home anyways. A woman in colonial times was completely responsible for cooking all of the meals, raising the children, sewing clothing, weaving cloth, and keeping the house in order.
Women's statuses were determined by their wealth and religion. Once settled, traditional roles of women included housework and taking care of the children.
A married woman's legal identity was not separate from her husband's whatsoever. As a matter of fact, a woman's individual interest not only had to be determined by her husband, but represented by him as well.
These men influenced women so much that women were expected to obey them without question. Honey, I'm exhausted.
No, I don't care. Fix my supper, woman.
While life in colonial America was tough for any woman, some had it better than others. Women in the city lived a contrasting lifestyle from most. In a city, women were more easily able to socialize. Sometimes they even had jobs outside of their home, such as a seamstress, midwife, or innkeeper.
As you can see, life in colonial America was very difficult for women.
America certainly has come a long way since the colonial times.
Women's contributions as early as colonial times have helped shape America into what it is today.
That's all for today's episode of the Colonial Cooking Show. Join us next week for America's favorite dessert, pies. Learn the tips and tricks of your favorite pies, strawberry, blueberry, and apple.
Goodbye! And God bless you all.